there's a number that quietly separates two completely different kinds of people. Not rich people and poor people, not high earners and low earners, something more subtle than that, and far more important. The number is $20,000. And here's what's strange about it. It's not a number you'll find in most financial advice. Nobody talks about it the way they talk about maxing out your retirement account or building a 6-month emergency fund. It doesn't have a catchy name. There's no viral post about it. But the people who cross this threshold, who manage to accumulate $20,000 in savings or investments, almost universally describe the experience the same way. They say something shifted, not just in their bank account, in their entire relationship with money, with work, with the decisions they make every single day. Something changed that they didn't expect and can't fully explain. So that's what this video is about. What actually happens when you hit $20,000 saved? Why does that specific number matter so much? And why do most people, even people with decent incomes, never get there? Because the answer has almost nothing to do with math and everything to do with psychology. Problem setup. Let's start with the uncomfortable reality. Most people in their 20s and 30s are living in a state of permanent financial fragility. And I don't mean they're broke. I mean that one unexpected expense, a car repair, a medical bill, a sudden job loss, would derail everything. The rent gets missed, the credit card gets maxed, the stress becomes suffocating. Studies consistently show that a significant portion of adults couldn't cover a $1,000 emergency without borrowing money or selling something. $1,000. That's it. And the reason most people give is simple. I just don't earn enough to save. But here's where it gets interesting. When researchers actually track spending against income, they find something surprising. The savings gap for most people in this range isn't explained by rent or groceries or transportation, the actual necessities. It's explained by 100 small decisions made from a particular psychological state, a state called financial scarcity mindset. And this is the real enemy. Not your income, not your expenses. The mental framework you're operating from when you have no financial cushion underneath you. When you have nothing saved, every financial decision you make is slightly distorted. You're not thinking about the future, you're reacting to the present. And that reactive mode, that constant low-level financial anxiety, quietly costs you far more money than most people realize. This is the trap, and $20,000 is the way out of it. To understand why $20,000 specifically is so significant, you first need to understand what financial psychologists call the scarcity trap. When people don't have enough of something, money, time, food, anything, their cognitive bandwidth narrows. Their entire mental focus tunnels toward the immediate shortage. This isn't a choice, it's an automatic neurological response. Your brain treats scarcity like a threat, and when there's a threat, everything else becomes background noise. Researchers Sendhil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir spent years studying this phenomenon and found something remarkable. People operating under financial scarcity consistently made worse financial decisions, not because they were less intelligent, but because scarcity itself was consuming the mental bandwidth they needed to think clearly. The stress of having nothing left was literally reducing their cognitive capacity. Think about what that means in practical terms. When you have $200 in your account and a bill is due in 3 days, you're not thinking about investing. You're not comparing subscription prices or negotiating your phone plan or researching whether you're overpaying on insurance. You're focused entirely on the immediate problem in front of you. Everything else blurs. And in that blurred state, you make choices you wouldn't otherwise make. You pay the late fee because dealing with it now feels impossible. You use the credit card because it's the only option visible in the moment. You skip the doctor's appointment because you can't think about money and health at the same time. Every single one of these decisions costs you money, and they compound just like interest does, but in the wrong direction. This is the scarcity trap. It's a loop. Having no savings causes stress. Stress narrows your thinking. Narrowed thinking leads to worse decisions. Worse decisions keep you from saving, and the loop continues. Now here's where $20,000 enters the picture. $20,000 is not a magic number in the mathematical sense. It's a psychological threshold. It represents the point at which the scarcity loop finally breaks. With $20,000 saved, a $1,000 car repair is an inconvenience, not a catastrophe. A slow month at work doesn't trigger panic. A medical expense doesn't mean choosing between rent and treatment. The immediate threats that were consuming your mental bandwidth simply stop being threats. And when those threats disappear, something remarkable happens to your thinking. It opens up. You start making decisions from a place of stability rather than survival. And decisions made from stability are almost always better, financially, professionally, and personally. Here's the deeper idea that most people never connect. Financial security doesn't just protect you from bad things, it actively creates good things. And the mechanism through which it does this is something psychologists call optionality. Optionality means having choices, real choices, not theoretical ones. When you have no savings, your choices are limited by necessity. You stay in the job that underpays you because you can't afford to be unemployed for even a month while you search for something better. You don't negotiate your salary because the anxiety of potentially losing the offer feels too dangerous when your account is near zero. You don't start the side project or take the course or make the career pivot because all of those things carry short-term financial risk that you simply cannot absorb. You're not making choices, you're making the only move available. Now imagine the same person with $20,000 sitting in a savings account. Suddenly, the negotiation feels different. If it goes badly, you have runway. You can walk away from a bad deal because a bad deal is no longer better than nothing. You can spend 2 or 3 months finding a better opportunity without the terror of financial freefall. That negotiation confidence, backed by real savings, statistically leads to higher lifetime earnings. The people who negotiate get paid more, and the people who can afford to negotiate are the ones with a cushion underneath them. The $20,000 isn't just sitting there being safe, it's working. It's changing the entire quality of decisions you make. It's giving you access to opportunities that are invisible from the scarcity trap. There's also a compounding psychological effect that happens once you cross this threshold. Behavioral economists call it savings momentum. When your balance is growing, when it crosses $5,000, then $10,000, then $15,000, something shifts in how you identify with money. You stop seeing yourself as someone who is bad with money. You start seeing yourself as someone who saves. And that identity shift is enormously powerful because humans are wired to behave in ways that are consistent with how they see themselves. Once you genuinely believe you are a person who saves and builds wealth, the decisions that support that identity become easier, not because willpower increased, but because those decisions now feel natural rather than forced. The first $20,000 is hard, partly because you're building the identity from scratch. Every dollar you save is fighting against an older story you've been telling yourself about money. But once you cross the threshold, the story has changed, and the new story does a lot of the heavy lifting for you.
So how do you actually get to $20,000, especially if you're starting from close to zero? The first thing to understand is that this is a 12 to 24-month project for most people, not a 3-month sprint. And that timeline actually matters because it changes how you approach it psychologically. If you expect it to happen fast and it doesn't, you'll give up. If you set a realistic horizon and track progress against it, you'll stay consistent. Let's run the numbers. $20,000 in 18 months means saving roughly $1,100 a month. In 24 months, it's about $835 a month. If those numbers feel impossible right now, start smaller and build up. The goal in the first month is not to save $1,000. The goal is to build the infrastructure, the automatic transfers, the separate account, the system, and prove to yourself that it works. Here's the structural approach that makes this achievable. First, open a dedicated account for this goal. Not your regular savings account, a separate account at a separate bank, ideally one with a competitive interest rate, so your money is at least keeping pace with inflation while it sits there. Name this account something that connects it to what it represents: Freedom Fund, Options Account, whatever makes it feel real and meaningful to you. Second, Automate a transfer on payday. The amount should be slightly uncomfortable, not painful enough to derail your life, but enough that you feel it. That slight discomfort is the feeling of progress. It means the money is actually moving. Third, treat this account as untouchable except for genuine emergencies, not sales, not trips, not things you really want, actual emergencies. This boundary is important because every time you dip into it for something non-essential, you reset the psychological momentum. You're not just losing money, you're reinforcing the old identity. Fourth, track the number, not obsessively, but regularly. Once a week, check the balance and watch it climb. The human brain responds to visible progress. When you can see the number moving, $4,200, then $4,800, then $5,500, the habit reinforces itself. The growing balance becomes its own motivation. And finally, as your income grows through a raise, a better job, a side income, resist the lifestyle inflation that typically swallows those increases. Redirect at least half of every income increase directly into this goal. You are already living fine on your previous income. You won't miss money you never started spending. One more thing. If you're in debt, credit card debt especially, the psychological calculus here changes slightly. High-interest debt is an emergency that compounds against you daily. In most cases, the smartest path is to split your surplus between aggressive debt repayment and building a small initial cushion around $3,000 to $5,000 before going full force toward $20,000. That small cushion breaks the emergency loop that keeps most people in debt permanently. Let's come back to the beginning. There's a number that quietly separates two kinds of people. Not by income, not by intelligence, not by luck, by the presence or absence of a cushion that changes the entire quality of their thinking. Below $20,000, most people are reacting. They're making decisions under pressure, from fear, with narrowed vision. They're staying in bad situations because they can't afford the uncertainty of leaving. They're missing opportunities they can barely see because survival is taking up all the bandwidth. Above $20,000, the whole game changes, not because the world treats you differently, though sometimes it does, but because you treat yourself differently. You negotiate more. You take more considered risks. You make decisions from a place of stability rather than panic. You stop being a person who is always one emergency away from crisis, and you start becoming a person who builds. And that shift, that quiet, invisible shift in how you move through financial life, compounds in ways that are almost impossible to fully predict from where you're standing now. The $20,000 is not the destination, it's the launch pad. It's the point where money stops being something that happens to you and starts being something you actually control. And if you can get there, through 2026 or whenever you're watching this, the version of you on the other side of that threshold will look back and understand something that's very hard to explain to someone who hasn't felt it yet. It's not just financial security. It's the feeling of having a foundation solid enough to actually build something on. And that feeling changes everything.